Hello and welcome to an episode of Agri Art. In this episode, we'll be talking about slipper orchids in art and science. The first known instance of botany was the Greek physician Theophrastus of Lesbos, who lived between 371 BCE and 387 BCE. Much of his manuscripts were distilled by Dioscorides, who lived between 40 and 90 CE. This is also one of the first instances of botanical art, a tradition that remained steady until modern times, with the advent of photographs. Slipper orchids or lay slippers are a series of orchids, are a group of orchids comprising about 160 species and several genera. The traits of a lay slipper can be seen in the next few sections of the video. One of the key traits is the slipper-shaped lip termed synensipel, 2 feral anthers and 2 sterile anthers, and a stalked trilobe stigma. The latter two traits cause the botanists of that time to believe that they are primitive orchids, in comparison to the other species and genera. Slipper orchids comprise 5 genera, but prior to that they're all comprised under Cypripedium. The first to split these different species into separate genera was Dr. Konstantin S. Rafensky, who understood the biology of both the hardy American species as well as the differences between different tropical species across the world. For his process, he named all these genera Psychodon, Psychogenus, Cordula, Memphophora, and Cryosthamphus. These genera would be renamed Paphiopedilum, Pregnapedilum, Cryptoxylum, Mexopedilum, and Cinepedilum. H.G. Reidenbach would be the first one to separate the temperate species from the tropical species. Ernst Weiser would then separate the tropical species into Paphiopedilum, with the tropical American ones being called Solenpedilum, and the temperate species called Cryptopedilum. Dr. Robert Rolfe, in 1896, revised the slipper orchids once more, with all the old world tropical ones being categorized under Paphiopedilum, and renaming the tropical ones Pregnapedilum, reducing Cinepedilum down to 5 species. The genus Mexopedilum, which consists of only 1 species, was first to be discovered in 1992 by Dr. Albert and Dr. Chase. It is said to be the intermediary between the temperate North American species and the tropical species, to the analysis of the different paintings. Next we'll talk about the Cryptopediums, and to quote Reginald Ferrer of the English Rock Garden, Cryptopediums are the grandest and most august of the Orchidaceae, one great race that is supreme alike in the open and under cover, and deserves full treatment by itself. Amongst the orchids in the ancient world, this genus has had a great history within European and American art. Indeed, the Bachefeld tapestry in the Basel Museum of Switzerland was first discovered in a town just northeast of Switzerland called Balanis. This tapestry dates back to 1510 and depicts the common species Cryptopedium calicosus in a very accurate detail. It is depicted alongside other native plants such as oxlip and columbine, as well as wild strawberry. This is the first known depiction of a lay slipper orchid within Europe. The term Cryptopedium was first coined in 1737 by Carl Linnaeus, the father of taxonomy and a major time botanist. The namesake is Cryptopedium, which alludes to Cyprus, the proverbial birthplace of Aphrodite, and pedilum, which translates to shoe or slipper. He took the common name lay slipper and made it sciencey. He described 2 species of hardy lay slipper in Europe, Cryptopedium cacacolus and Cryptopedium bulbosum. This was later expanded into several North American species such as Cryptopedium parvifolium, Cryptopedium aquile, and Cryptopedium guttatum. Outside of tapestries, the first known depiction of Cryptopedium would be 1568 in a herbal by Rembar Dodeus entitled Florum Cororium, Ordinacum, Lonulum, Herbarium Historia. Like the tapestry, it was a depiction of Papanchoan, also known as Cryptopedium caculolus. The herbalists called it Caculolus sacerdotis, which is the origin point for the specific epithet, Caeculosus. It was also known as Papenschoen in Germany. This play was reproduced by herbalists such as John Gerard within his book in 1597, and in yet another herbal by John Parkinson in 1629. Indeed, Mr. Diodon's work appears to have been plagiarized heavily by these two individuals. By a kid, of course, it was much more common for people to take and recreate things back in that time period. It was mentioned that Cryptopedium calculus was growing within Lancashire and Yorkshire, as well as a place called Helks within the UK. Mr. Diodens mentioned that it was growing in Hungary and Austria within the wild, indicating that this species has had quite a broad range throughout history. John Parkinson was also the first to note that lace slippers resembled orchids, and in 1763, Dr. Michael Antonsen became the first botanist to formally incorporate lace slippers into the orchid family, based on physiology, which would be proved to be correct thanks to genetic data. The earliest known actual painting of the lace slipper appeared in 1541, a watercolor painting of the plant from Mount Salou in Swiss Jura, near Geneva, painted by Conrad Gesner of Geneva. He died before it could be published, and was later published by Mr. Chamille sometime between 1754 and 1759, as well as publishing parts of Gesner's botanical work in the form of the Opera Botanica. But back to Mr. Parkinson's work. During his efforts, he went and categorized a great many different species of European lace slipper. Within North America, a figure by the name of J.P. Cornut created in 1635 a book called Canadesium Planetarium Historia. There he categorized 3 different species of Cryptopedium: Cryptopedium aculae, Cryptopedium parviforum, and Cryptopedium, as well as illustrating them. These would be the first known paintings of North American lace slipper species, with many others following in his footsteps. It would ultimately be Philip Miller who brought the first paintings of hardy lace slipper orchids, both European and North American, to the UK. This occurred in 1730. Next we'll cover Paphiopedilums, seen on the right, and Pregdipediums, seen on the left. The continued presence within India by the British allowed for British explorers to obtain greater and greater enrichment in terms of plant species. A large number of European explorers would go around and gather up what they could to discover what plants and categorize them. One such institution that employed such collectors was the Institution Kew, K-E-W. This organization was already known for fine illustration of European lace slippers. In 1826, 2 depictions of the Paphiopedilum species, Paphiopedilum insigne, were created. This species comes from the Cassia Hills in the Himalayan region. Another species from a similar region was Paphiopedilum vesistum. Plant collectors would also illustrate the plants, creating various paintings. Several of these Kew paintings still survive to this day, such as Hugh Lowe's original watercolor of Paphiopedilum lowii, and Charles Parrish's watercolor of the eponymous Paphiopedilum parshi. Over 200 years since then, various magazines and other subsidiaries were used to create illustrations we have of Kew, and various artists depict these plants quite extensively. The finest works of these artists were then placed into Robert Warner's Select Orchideous Plants. Kew to this day still possesses many remarkable illustrations in its archive, including 53 scrapbooks that John Day created. These scrapbooks comprise over 2,800 orchid illustrations, illustrating 44 species, 48 hybrids, across 3 lace slipper genera, which include Cryptopedium, Paphiopedilum, and Pregdipedium. This individual is also the one behind the labeling of 30 species of Paphiopedilum, as well as successfully growing them and flowering them. An impressive individual to be sure. The most famous orchid of his collection was, of course, the specimen of Paphiopedilum stoni, subspecies Patentolium. This is the species seen on screen right now, on the right-hand side of the current slide. We will conclude this by talking about Pregdipediums and Silopediums. The first known collection of American slipper orchids from the tropics occurred in 1777 to 1788 under the botanists Hippolyto and Jose Gilones. This was on behalf of King Carlos III during botanical explorations of Peru and Chile. The result was 3,000 collections of herbarium specimens and 2,500 watercolor illustrations. This formed the basis for their 10-volume book Flora Proverbia et Chilensis, which was written between 1798 to 1802. Only the first 4 were published within their lifetime. The other 6 were published post-mortem. Amongst them are Pregupedilum caudatum and Pregupedilum boisteranum. Neither were described at that time, and the herbarium specimens were poorly preserved to provide description until much later, when it's rediscovered. Prior to the split-off, however, they were named Cryptidium turgatum and Cryptidium ancanutum. These were published posthumously in 1890. Most of the Pregupedium species were put in the Cryptopidium lineage, of course. During this time, the famous collector, Mr. Lindley, the same guy who collected a great many Cattleya orchids, hired an artist and collector by the name of Robert Schomburg, which became the basis for a name of a genus called Schomburgia. But I digress. Mr. Schomburg collected specimens from Guyana, naming one of the species after his employer. Later on, after the genus was split up into multiple different genera, his successors, working for Kew, would continue in his vein. Evenard Im Fern, who lived between 1852 and 1932, scaled the same mountain some years later, and painted the species Silopedium palmifolium. This painting still survives within the Kew library. Frederick Lehman, born 1850, died 1893, was one of the primary orchid collectors of that time, and he painted a great many Pregupediums. Likewise, John Day also produced a great many watercolors of various Pregupedium species, including Pregupedium bosseum, Pregupedium caudatum, and Pregupedium shimeli, as well as Pregupedium walsii. John Day also worked for the Royal Horticultural Society. During this time, a great many individuals were crossbreeding different species of orchid together to create different hybrids. In every cultivar that was bred and accepted, he catalogued and painted, and a great many of his paintings still survive to this day. But as of right now, the painting of Pregupedium shimeli is still one of my favorite paintings Mr. Day created. The painting you can see on the left hand side. And that about covers everything. Thank you for watching. Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. If you really enjoyed it and think you can donate, you can do so at Buy Me a Coffee, link in the description below. Thank you for watching.